When an eccentric billionaire leaves his vast fortune to his greediest relatives, the one nephew who actually cared for him receives nothing but a broken, rusted brass clock. But hidden within its dead gears lies a secret that will rewrite their family history. Before you throw away inherited junk, listen closely. The mahogany-paneled conference room at Gallagher, Wyatt and Linus smelled of expensive leather-stale coffee and unrestrained greed. It was a torrential Tuesday afternoon in Boston, rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. Lucas Reed sat at the far end of the sprawling table, his slightly frayed charcoal suit making him stick out like a sore thumb among the sea of Tom Ford and custom Armani. At 32, Lucas looked entirely thoroughly exhausted. Dark circles underscored his eyes, the physical toll of spending the last 2.5 years sleeping in a reclining chair beside a hospital bed. At the head of the table sat Charles Harrington, a senior partner, whose face seemed permanently etched in a solemn frown. Flanking Lucas were his cousins. To his left was Beatrice Montgomery, scrolling idly on her phone, her diamond tennis bracelet clinking against the mahogany. To his right was Philip, a hedge fund manager whose aggressive cologne was giving Lucas a migraine. They were all here for the reading of the last will and testament of Alistair Montgomery. Alistair had been a titan of industry. He had built Montgomery Logistics from a single rented warehouse into a multi-billion-dollar global shipping empire. He was also notoriously a difficult man, a ruthless negotiator, and a distant patriarch. But to Lucas, Alistair was simply Uncle Al, the man who had taught him how to play chess and tie a Windsor knot after Lucas's own father passed away. When Alistair was diagnosed with aggressive Lewy body dementia 3 years ago, Beatrice and Philip had immediately started calculating their inheritances from the comfort of their Manhattan penthouses. Lucas, a struggling architect, had put his career on hold, moved into Alistair's Beacon Hill estate, and became his primary caretaker. He fed him, bathed him, and held his hand through the terrifying hallucinations. Lucas had bankrupted himself doing it. He was currently $80,000 in debt, 2 months behind on his apartment rent in South Boston, and facing immediate eviction. But he had never asked Alistair for a dime. He assumed naively that his loyalty and love would be recognized when the time came. Harrington cleared his throat, adjusting his reading glasses. We will now proceed with the distribution of the primary assets. To my niece, Beatrice Montgomery, I leave the estate in Southampton, New York, along with the sum of $450 million. Beatrice didn't even look up from her phone. She simply smirked. Finally, to my nephew, Philip Montgomery. Harrington continued, his voice monotone. I leave my 62% controlling stake in Montgomery Logistics, as well as the penthouse property at Central Park West. Philip leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. Looks like the board answers to me now. Lucas swallowed hard, his heart hammering against his ribs. Alistair's net worth was estimated at just over $2 billion. The math was rapidly closing in on the remainder. He didn't need millions. He just needed enough to clear his debts and maybe start his firm. Just a fraction of a percent of the estate would change his life. Harrington turned the page. He paused, looking up at Lucas with a gaze that held a flicker of genuine pity. And finally to my nephew, Lucas Reed. Lucas sat forward. I leave. Harrington sighed softly. He reached beneath the table and placed a wooden box on the polished mahogany. He unlatched it and pulled out a tarnished, heavy brass carriage clock. The glass face was cracked straight down the middle. The brass was deeply oxidized green around the edges, and the hands were frozen at exactly 11:59. I leave the 1894 French carriage clock that sat upon my study desk, Harrington read, and I attach the following personal addendum to Lucas, who gave me his time when I had none left to give. I leave my time. May you understand its true value." The room went dead silent for exactly 3 seconds before Philip burst into a cruel, barking laugh. "A broken clock," Philip choked out, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "He left you a piece of scrap metal. Oh, that is classic Uncle Alistair, the ultimate pragmatist. You gave up your 30s to wipe his chin, and he tipped you with a paperweight." Beatrice finally looked up, offering a mock, sympathetic pout. "I'm sure you can pawn it for a few $100s, Tommy. I hear brass is trading up." Lucas felt the blood drain from his face. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on his chest. It wasn't just the lack of money. It was the betrayal, the profound, staggering slap in the face. Alistair had been lucid in his final weeks. He knew Lucas was drowning in debt. Why would he do this? Was it a sick joke? "Mr. Harrington," Lucas said, his voice trembling slightly. Is there a trust? A secondary account?" "I am sorry, Lucas," Harrington said softly. "The will is ironclad. The remainder of the liquid assets are being donated to various philanthropic foundations as per Mr. Montgomery's instructions. The clock is your sole inheritance." Lucas stood up. The room felt like it was spinning. He reached out his fingers, brushing the cold, rough brass of the broken clock. It weighed a solid 5 pounds. He didn't say a word to Philip or Beatrice. He simply picked up the clock, shoved it into his satchel, and walked out of the conference room into the torrential Boston rain, feeling utterly, completely broken. By 11 p.m., Lucas was sitting at the wobbly laminate kitchen table of his cramped South Boston apartment. The radiator clanked violently, doing little to chase away the November chill. A stack of final notice bills sat to his left. To his right, a half-empty bottle of cheap bourbon. And in the center of the table sat the clock. He had spent the evening staring at it, oscillating between profound grief and blinding rage. Earlier that evening, in a moment of sheer desperation, he had taken the clock to Holloway Antiques on Charles Street. Old Mr. Holloway had taken one look at it through his jeweler's loupe and sighed. "I'm sorry, Lucas. It's a fake. A very clever replica of a 19th century breguet, likely manufactured in the late 1970s. The casing is poorly cast brass, not bronze. The gears are modern and utterly misaligned. It's essentially a movie prop. I couldn't even give you $50 for it." A fake. Alistair Montgomery was a renowned collector of genuine antiquities. He owned real Fabergé eggs and authenticated Roman busts. He despised replicas. He famously fired an executive once for wearing a counterfeit Rolex. Why then did the billionaire keep a worthless 1970s replica prominently on his desk for decades? And why, specifically, single it out in his will? To Lucas, who gave me his time when I had none left to give, I leave my time. May you understand its true value. Lucas took a sip of the bourbon. The alcohol burned his throat, sharpening his focus. He reached out and touched the cracked glass. The hands were permanently stuck at 11:59. 11:59. 1 minute to midnight. Out of time. He stood up, walked to his toolbox, and pulled out a precision screwdriver, set he used for his architectural model-making. He sat back down and pulled the clock under the harsh glare of his desk lamp. "Let's see what you really are," Lucas muttered. He started by unscrewing the 4 tiny Phillips head screws holding the backplate in place. They were incredibly tight rusted into place, requiring him to use pliers to gain leverage on the screwdriver. With a sharp crack, the rust broke, and the screws came free. He pried the backplate off. Inside, the gears were a mess. Holloway had been right. It was a chaotic jumble of poorly machined cogs that clearly couldn't keep time. But as Lucas probed the internal cavity with a small flashlight, something caught his eye. The main barrel, the brass cylinder that normally houses the tightly coiled mainspring to power the clock, was vastly oversized. It was also welded shut, which made zero sense from a horological standpoint. How would a watchmaker ever service the spring? Lucas tapped the barrel with the metal handle of his screwdriver. It didn't make a hollow tink. It made a dull, heavy thud. Solid. Heart racing, Lucas grabbed a pair of heavy-duty pliers and a flathead screwdriver. He wedged the flathead into the seam of the welded barrel and struck the back of it with the pliers like a hammer. Sparks flew. He hit it again, and again. On the fourth strike, the cheap, decades-old weld snapped. Lucas pried the cap off the barrel. Inside, there was no mainspring. Instead, there was a secondary, perfectly machined cylinder, made of matte grey metal. Tungsten. It was heavy, sleek, and utterly out of place inside the rusted brass casing. With trembling fingers, Lucas pulled the tungsten cylinder out. It was about the size of a roll of quarters. One end had a threaded cap. He unscrewed it. The seal broke with a faint hiss of escaping pressurized air. He tipped the cylinder over the table. Two things slid out. The first was a small, strangely shaped key with an octagonal head and a complex, laser-cut groove down its center. It looked like the key to a high-security safety deposit box. The second was a tightly rolled sheet of synthetic waterproof mylar paper. Lucas pushed the clock aside and carefully unrolled the mylar using his coffee mug and the bourbon bottle to weigh down the edges. He stared at it, his breath catching in his throat. It was a highly detailed architectural blueprint. Lucas recognized the drafting style immediately. It was from the mid-1980s. The title block in the bottom right corner read, Montgomery Paper Mill, Facility 4, Upstate New York. Lucas frowned. The Montgomery Paper Mill had gone bankrupt and was shuttered in 1998. It was a massive, decaying industrial ruin near the Canadian border, practically reclaimed by the forest. But this wasn't a standard blueprint. Overlaid on top of the standard floor plans were lines drawn in vivid red ink. They bypassed the main production floors and traced a path down into the sub-basement levels that, according to public architectural records, did not exist. The red line snaked through what was labeled as solid bedrock and ended in a small square room, designated only with a string of alphanumeric coordinates and a final handwritten note in Alistair's unmistakable scrawl. The wolves will hunt the meat, but the shepherd guards the gold. 11:59. Lucas's mind raced. 11:59. The time frozen on the clock. It wasn't a metaphor. It was the combination to whatever the key opened. Suddenly, the heavy silence of the apartment was shattered by a sharp, buzzing sound. Lucas jumped, knocking over his chair. It was his apartment intercom. He glanced at the digital clock on his microwave. 2:14 a.m. Nobody rings an intercom in South Boston at 2:14 a.m. unless it's a cop or a mistake. He didn't answer it. He stood perfectly still, listening. A minute passed. Nothing. Lucas exhaled, thinking it was just a drunk hitting the wrong button. He turned back to the table, reaching for the blueprint. Then came the sound. A soft, metallic scratching right outside his apartment door. The unmistakable sound of tension tools sliding into a deadbolt lock. Someone was picking his lock. Panic flared in Lucas's chest. He didn't have money. He didn't have valuables. The only reason someone would break into his apartment tonight was the clock. Philip. Philip's laugh in the conference room echoed in his mind. Philip hadn't been laughing because it was a joke. Philip had been laughing because he knew Lucas had just been handed the map, and he knew Lucas was completely defenseless. Click. The deadbolt disengaged. Lucas had mere seconds. He snatched the mylar blueprint and the tungsten key, shoving them deep into the inside pocket of his jacket. He grabbed his phone and darted toward the bedroom, kicking the kitchen table hard as he passed to create an obstacle. As the heavy wooden front door crashed open, splintering the doorframe, Lucas threw open his bedroom window. The freezing November rain blasted into his face. "He's in the back!" A rough, unfamiliar voice shouted from the living room. Heavy boots pounded against the hardwood floor. They tripped over the kitchen table, cursing loudly as the brass clock crashed to the ground. Lucas scrambled out onto the rusted iron fire escape, his hand slipping on the wetter metal. He didn't look back. He hauled himself up, climbing toward the roof rather than down to the alley, knowing they would expect him to flee to the street. Below him, a flashlight beam swept out of his bedroom window, cutting through the rain. "He's on the fire escape mover." Lucas scrambled over the parapet, collapsing onto the flat tar paper roof of his building, rain soaking through his thin suit instantly. He pressed his hand against his chest, feeling the crinkle of the mylar blueprint against his hammering heart. Uncle Alistair hadn't just left him an inheritance. He had left him a massive target on his back. And Lucas realized, shivering in the dark, that if he wanted to survive, he was going to have to hunt the gold before the wolves hunted him. The adrenaline pumping through Lucas's veins was the only thing keeping him from freezing to death. He scrambled across the uneven tar-slicked roof of the adjacent apartment complex, his breath pluming in the frigid air. Behind him, flashlight beams sliced through the Boston rain, frantically sweeping the alleys. Whoever Philip had hired, they were professionals. They moved with a terrifying silent efficiency that belonged in a war zone, not a gentrified neighborhood in South Boston. Lucas didn't stop running until he was blocks away, slipping into the neon-lit sanctuary of a 24-hour diner. He sat in a corner booth, shivering uncontrollably, clutching the mylar blueprint inside his soaked jacket. He ordered a black coffee, staring out the window at the passing headlights. He had no money, his apartment was compromised, and his life was suddenly in danger. But he had the map. By 6 a.m., Lucas was standing outside a seedy pawn shop in Roxbury. He made the hardest decision of his life, sliding his late father's gold wedding band across the scratched glass counter. He walked out with $400, enough for a burner phone, a heavy surplus canvas jacket, a heavy-duty flashlight, and a one-way Amtrak ticket to Syracuse, New York. During the 6-hour train ride, Lucas spread the mylar blueprint across the tray table, studying Alistair's intricate red lines. The Montgomery paper mill was located just outside Ogdensburg, a grim industrial town hugging the St. Lawrence River on the Canadian border. From Syracuse, he rented a battered, mud-splattered Chevrolet Tahoe from a cash-only lot and drove 2 hours north into the deep, isolating wilderness of upstate New York. The Montgomery paper mill was a terrifying sight. It loomed out of the encroaching pine forest like the skeleton of a prehistoric beast. The massive brick smokestacks were crumbling, and nature had aggressively reclaimed the concrete grounds. Decades of harsh winters had shattered every window, leaving the main processing buildings looking like hollow, gaping mouths. Lucas parked the Tahoe deep in the woods a mile down the road and hiked the rest of the way in the fading afternoon light. He clicked on his heavy-duty flashlight, the beam cutting through the dense, dust-filled air of the main processing floor. The smell of sulfur-wet rot and decades-old industrial chemicals was overwhelming. He followed his mental map, down a rusted, groaning stairwell into sub-level 1. The boiler room was a graveyard of massive oxidized steel drums. He found ventilation shaft 4A, exactly where the blueprint indicated, prying off the loose grating and crawling through 30 feet of claustrophobic, rat-infested aluminum ductwork. He dropped into sub-level 2, splashing into ankle-deep stagnant water. The silence down here was absolute, broken only by the steady drip-drip of condensation. He climbed onto the overhead maintenance catwalk, his boots slipping on the slick metal grating, carefully navigating his way to the deepest sector of the facility. Finally, he reached the end of the line. Sub-level 3. According to public records, this floor didn't exist. It was just bedrock. But as Lucas rounded the corner of a damp, concrete corridor, his flashlight illuminated something that made his heart stop. Set into the rough, natural stone of the foundation was a pristine, heavy steel door. It was a custom-modified Mosler safe door, the kind used in high-security bank vaults during the Cold War. There was no keypad, no digital scanner, just a single heavy steel dial, and beneath it, a small octagonal keyhole. The wolves will hunt the meat, but the shepherd guards the gold. 1159. Lucas's hands shook as he pulled the tungsten key from his pocket. He approached the vault. The air here was strangely dry, preserved by some hidden climate control system. He gripped the cold steel dial. Right to 11. Left to 5. Right to 9. A heavy metallic clack echoed from deep within the door's mechanisms. Lucas inserted the octagonal tungsten key. The complex laser-cut grooves caught perfectly. He turned it. With a pressurized hiss that mirrored the opening of the clock cylinder, the massive locking bolts retracted. Lucas grabbed the heavy steel lever, threw his entire body weight into it, and pulled the vault door open. The interior of the vault was a jarring contrast to the decaying mill outside. It was a perfectly preserved mahogany-paneled room, illuminated by soft overhead LED lights that flickered to life the moment the door breached. It was an exact miniature replica of Alistair Montgomery's study in Beacon Hill. In the center of the room sat a heavy oak desk. On the desk lay 3 items: a black Halliburton aluminum briefcase, a thick leather-bound ledger, and a simple white-sealed envelope with Lucas's name on it. Lucas stepped inside the heavy door resting open behind him. He walked to the desk and picked up the envelope. He broke the wax seal and unfolded the heavy cream-colored parchment. My dearest Lucas, if you are reading this, you had the ingenuity to look beyond the surface and the courage to face the dark. I knew Philip and Beatrice would dismiss the clock. Greed makes people violently short-sighted. You spent years caring for a dying old man, expecting nothing. You are the only decent blood left in this family. But I could not simply hand you a check. My empire is surrounded by jackals, and Philip is the worst of them. He has been embezzling from Montgomery Logistics for a decade, moving illicit funds through offshore shell companies. The briefcase before you contains $300 million in untraceable authenticated bearer bonds. The ledger details every illegal transaction Philip has ever made. Take the bonds. Take the money, Lucas, and disappear. Build your firm. Live a good life. Leave the ledger to rot. Let Philip have the hollow corporate throne. With profound gratitude, Uncle Al Lucas stared at the briefcase. $300 million. It was an incomprehensible sum. It was freedom. It was power. He reached out his hand, hovering over the aluminum handle. I wouldn't touch that if I were you, Tommy. The voice echoed sharply through the concrete corridor behind him. Lucas whipped around. Standing in the vault doorway, a suppressed Glock 19 leveled squarely at Lucas's chest, was Philip. Behind him stood a massive, heavily armed mercenary, wearing tactical gear, the man who had broken into Lucas's apartment. Philip stepped into the immaculate room, a smug, greedy smile plastered across his face. His expensive Italian suit was ruined by mud and water, but he didn't care. His eyes were glued to the briefcase. "Did you really think a burner phone would stop us?" Philip sneered. "My security team pinged the GPS on your rental Tahoe an hour ago. You did all the dirty work for me. You crawled through the mud, found the vault, and opened the door. I have to thank you, really." Lucas backed away from the desk, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Philip, you don't understand. The money in there is mine." Philip interrupted his voice, dropping into a dangerous snarl. "I earned it. I kept the board happy while Uncle Alastair was losing his mind. I built the modern logistics network. Beatrice is an idiot, and you are just the help. Step away from the desk." Lucas raised his hands, slowly taking a step to the left. Philip holstered his weapon, completely consumed by the prize. He stepped forward, grabbing the handle of the Halliburton briefcase. 300 million. He practically stole this from the shareholders, and now it's coming home. Philip read the letter. Lucas warned, a sudden cold realization washing over him. He remembered the handwritten note on the blueprint. "The wolves will hunt the meat, but the shepherd guards the gold." Philip ignored him. He hauled the heavy briefcase off the desk. The moment the briefcase lifted from the wood, a sharp mechanical click echoed from beneath the desk. Suddenly, the heavy Mosler vault door began to swing shut on its hydraulic hinges. "Briggs, stop the door!" Philip yelled. The mercenary lunged for the steel slab, but it was moving with unstoppable motorized force. He shoved his shoulder against it, but the weight was too immense. With a deafening metallic boom, the vault door slammed shut, sealing them inside. The electronic locking mechanisms engaged with a terrifying finality. Philip laughed nervously. "Fine, we're locked in. Briggs has thermite in his pack. We'll burn through the hinges. It doesn't matter. I have the bonds." He popped the latches on the briefcase and flipped it open. Lucas stared at the contents. There were no bearer bonds. Instead, the briefcase was packed with neatly stacked reams of printed documents, bank statements, internal Montgomery logistics memos, offshore wire transfers. The paper trail was damning explicit and thoroughly documented. Sitting on top of the papers was a small, blinking red cellular transmitter. Philip's face went completely pale. What is this?" "It's not money, Philip," Lucas said, quietly stepping backward toward the rear wall of the vault. "It's your execution. The ledger on the desk is a fake. That briefcase is the real ledger. It's the proof of your embezzlement." A mechanical voice suddenly emanated from a hidden speaker in the ceiling. "Weight sensor disengaged. Faraday cage deactivated. Emergency transmission initiated. Evidence uploaded to Federal Bureau of Investigation, Albany Field Office. ETA for tactical response, 18 minutes. "No." Philip breathed, dropping the briefcase. Papers spilled across the pristine mahogany floor. No. He set me up, that old bastard. Set me up." Philip pulled his gun again, his eyes wild with panic. "How do we get out of here, Lucas?" "Tell me." Lucas didn't answer. He had been studying the wood paneling on the back wall. His architect's eye had caught something Philip's greed had missed. The grain of the mahogany didn't align perfectly on the third panel from the right. It was a seam. Alistair hadn't just left a trap for the wolf. He had left a gate for the shepherd. Lucas pressed hard against the panel. It clicked and swung inward, revealing a dark and narrow emergency maintenance tunnel that bypassed the vault entirely. "Briggs, grab him!" Philip screamed. Lucas dove into the dark tunnel, slamming the panel shut behind him. He heard the muffled impact of Briggs crashing against the wood, followed by the dull thud, thud, thud of bullets hitting the reinforced steel plating hidden behind the mahogany. Lucas ran. He ran through the dark, winding tunnel for what felt like miles, until the air grew fresh and cold. He pushed open a rusted grate and tumbled out into the freezing mud of the pine forest 1/2 mile away from the decaying mill. He lay in the mud, gasping for air, the rain washing the dirt from his face. He reached into his pocket. In the chaos, he had held onto the small envelope. He pulled out the letter from Alistair. But it wasn't just a letter. Tucked behind the parchment was a small black plastic card. A numbered anonymous access card for a private vault at the Union Bank of Switzerland in Zurich. Lucas looked back toward the looming silhouette of the Montgomery Mill. In the distance, cutting through the silence of the upstate wilderness, he heard the faint, approaching wail of federal sirens. Uncle Alistair had paid him for his time after all. He had paid him with a future, and he had paid him with justice. Lucas stood up, zipped his coat against the cold, and began the long walk back to his car. It was time to start building. If this story of greed, brilliant traps, and ultimate redemption kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and drop a comment below on what you would have done if you inherited a broken clock. Don't forget to share this incredible tale with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling real-life mysteries, hidden treasures, and dramatic stories. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an adventure. See you in the next video.